Thank you for joining the 7th webinar of the fiscal year 24 CSBG Annual Report webinar series, Understanding and Troubleshooting SmartForms. This is the penultimate webinar of this series. The purpose of this webinar is to provide updates to the CSBG grant recipients, or states and territories, and subrecipients, or CSBG eligible entities who use SmartForms to collect data for the CSBG Annual Report. If you use a state database or a system, this webinar may still be useful to you. As we focus on the commonalities from the fiscal year 23 Federal Quality Assurance Review, or the FQAR, and how to use the SmartForms to refine your review prior to submitting to OCS. We will also discuss submitting comments to supplement your submission and completing the Module 3 SmartForm. I am Monique Alcantara. I am a management analyst and the data evaluation specialist for regions 4, 6, and 7. I am joined today by Tiffany Jarvis, the research director of the National Association for State Community Services Programs, or NASCAS. And I also want to extend a warm welcome from the Office of Community Services leadership. Today, we'll do a review of the reporting requirements. These requirements should be familiar from previous webinars in this series. We will then provide tips for better understanding the SmartForms and how they function, followed by how to access the SmartForms for optimal use, and then tips and tricks specifically related to modules 2 and 4. Again, these are primarily focused on commonalities that we noticed during the fiscal year 23 review and how to use the SmartForms to potentially lessen the comments during the review post-submission. Then we'll provide some information about submitting comments. This was briefly touched on during the Module 2 and Module 4 webinars, but we will get a bit more specific throughout this webinar as to what exactly we are looking for if you choose to submit comments. We'll provide some guidance on completing the Module 3 SmartForm, followed by a review of the available resources and reminders of what is coming next. As with previous webinars, we will have a survey after the content and before the Q&A. We do review the feedback and consider the feedback for future webinars. And even if you do not have any questions, we recommend staying on. One of your peers may have a question that you do not think of that will help you in your submission this year. A quick review of reporting requirements. Again, these should be familiar as they've been discussed in previous webinars from this series. So, why are we reporting the annual report? Well, it is a requirement born out of statutory authority, specifically the CSBG Act. Among other things, grant recipients should be submitting their reports annually where they capture measured performance of the CSBG eligible entities, accounting of funds spent on administrative costs by eligible entities, direct service delivery, and the number and characteristics of participants served. This is an overview of the fiscal year 24 CSBG annual report process. For a full review of this process, please revisit the kickoff webinar for the series held on October 15th. However, I will focus on the first 2 steps of the process. First, the role of grant recipients or states and territories with subrecipients or CSBG eligible entities. It is absolutely critical that states and territories are reviewing the data submitted by CSBG eligible entities prior to submitting to OCS. This is an opportune time to check for errors, warnings, and the holistic validity of the data. Additionally, this may result in less comments in the review memo during the FQAR. After the grant administrator completes the review, then they will submit the complete report in OLDC, or the online data collection system. A complete report includes modules 1, 2, and 4. Module 3 remains optional. And as a reminder, all agencies that received fiscal year 23 funding must submit modules 2 and 4. This should also be familiar from the Collecting Individual and Family Characteristics, or Module 4 webinar. Today's webinar is focused on the SmartForm, and I'll emphasize again the critical role that states and territories play in reviewing the data that you receive. Later today, we will discuss the XML export, and on December 9th, we'll do a live demo of the XML export, as well as the OLDC upload and submitting the data to OCS. Once the data is submitted to OCS, we will begin the annual report review, or the FQAR. But again, today's webinar is focused on the SmartForm and providing guidance to you to assist you in submitting your data using the SmartForm. During each of our webinars, we often use the phrase "a complete submission." And I want to reiterate what a complete submission is specifically for Module 2 and 4, as it directly relates to the data that is submitted through the SmartForms. All entities that received fiscal year 23 funding must submit Modules 2 and 4. As a rule of thumb, if the entity is reported in the state plan, it must be reflected in the annual report in some way. Additionally, if the entity received and expended any funding between October 1st, 2023 through September 30th, 2024, they must submit a report. We understand that there could be changes such as a de-designation or a voluntary relinquishment after submitting the CSBG state plan, but the entity should still report if it received and expended funds during the fiscal year. When it is time to upload the XMLs, we understand that XMLs sometimes can fail in OLDC. So please check the status of each XML submission in OLDC to ensure that everything uploaded correctly. If you experience any issues, please email your data and evaluation specialist, and they will be able to assist you. We will also do a live demo of this on December 9th. If there are any comments clarifying your data, please attach the comment template in OLDC. We'll discuss the purpose of the comments more thoroughly later in today's webinar. Module 3 should be attached to the Module 3 form within OLDC. And again, after all XMLs are successfully uploaded and you attach the comment template, if you choose, please do not forget to submit the state level form for all 4 modules. Our ability to release review memos and move forward with data mitigation, closeout, and further national reporting depends on timely and complete submission of the fiscal year 24 CSBG annual report. Just a bit more general information before we dive into the SmartForms. There must be a separate XML uploaded for each entity and for each module. And again, Module 3 should be attached as a SmartForm. We have had PDFs submitted in the past, but we are asking that you submit the SmartForm. If an entity does not have a transformation, please do not submit anything. Again, we will discuss uploads and attachments during the December 9th webinar. I want to take a moment to review the SmartForm and what we believe will smoothen the completion of SmartForms and the eventual submission of your data based on some commonalities that we noticed during the fiscal year 23 review. We believe that knowledge is peak and will be helpful to you as you complete the SmartForms. OCS released SmartForms to all states and territories, including those with state database or system, on November 26, 2024. If you are a state or territory and you have not received your SmartForms yet, please contact your data and evaluation specialist, and please copy CSBG data at acf.hhs.gov. If you are a CSBG eligible entity, please reach out to your state or territory lead agency to receive your SmartForms. For states that have a state database or system, they will establish the availability. So again, CSBG eligible entities should reach out to your state or territory lead agency to learn more about the availability. Each Module 2 and Module 4 SmartForm is pre-populated with the eligible entity name, as shown in the CSBG eligible entity list, the UEI, the current fiscal year, and previous year's data. With the exception of the prior year's data, these are key information that OLDC reads, but the fiscal year is especially important for modules 2 and 4. We have noticed that sometimes when an XML fails, it is because the prior year SmartForm was used, and this will always result in a failed upload. I'll speak more about how the fiscal year affects the XML upload shortly. For the majority, the eligible entities complete the SmartForms and then submits the data to the state or territory. However, there are a few cases in which the state or territory completes the SmartForm on the behalf of the eligible entity. And so, if you are an eligible entity who does not complete the SmartForm, you may ask yourself, well, why am I here? There is some important information that we share today that may be useful to you if your state or territory lead agency reaches out to you with a question about your data due to a comment they received during the FQAR. This webinar may give you some of that context for that comment or question. There are some commonalities or standard functions for every SmartForm. As detailed in this image, each SmartForm has an instructions tab. The instruction tab gives you an overview of the purpose of the SmartForm and how to use the SmartForm. The SmartForms for modules 2 and 4 also have an outstanding errors and warning tabs. Additionally, as previously noted, modules 2 and 4 have the prior year's data programmed in. For module 2, it is a side-by-side comparison, while with module 4, there are year-to-year comparison tabs for each section after the all characteristics report, as shown in this image. These tabs populate after you have entered data and saved. Module 3 does not have a year-to-year comparison, but as a reminder, for module 3, you should be reusing the form that you already completed, and only using a new form if you have a new transformation. Each SmartForm also has macros built into them. These macros are crucial to the SmartForm operating correctly. We are going to dive more into each of these functions throughout this webinar, but if you are a state or territory and you are having an issue, please contact your data and evaluation specialist. CSBG eligible entities should contact their state or territory lead agency. Some may have noticed that we updated how the SmartForms are named. Ultimately, this is to help with maintaining the correct file during the FQAR. There are issues when the file name is too long, so we shortened the original file name to allow for you to add what is needed for you to be able to verify that you are sending the right version when submitting revisions due to reviewer feedback from the state or territory or eventually OCS. The base of the file name still has the fiscal year, followed by the state abbreviation, then the module, and then the CSBG eligible entity. We've used abbreviations to capture Community Action Agency, Community Action Partnership or Program, and Community Action Development Commission, to name a few. It is important that the base, which includes the fiscal year, state, and module, remains the same as OCS uses this to identify the correct form is being used when providing technical assistance for failed XML uploads. As I've noted, we've shortened the CSBG eligible entity name when possible. However, you do have the choice to shorten the CSBG eligible entity name further if you choose. Then, to maintain versions, we recommend adding a version number at the end, or a date, or both. These are just recommendations, but are considered promising practices for maintaining correct files. By maintaining the versions, you can also go back to an older version if needed and make sure that you're submitting the right version. Speaking of, we also want to touch on data retention. It is important that you have a good data retention policies, but one promising practice for retaining data is to keep it for as long as absolutely necessary. Therefore, absent of an official retention policy, OCS encourages retaining all fiscal year 24 data and associated files, such as the SmartForms, until OCS sends the fiscal year 24 finalization and closeout email to the state or territory lead agency. Now I want to touch on one more thing about the importance of the fiscal year, primarily in modules 2 and 4. As I already noted, the naming convention includes the fiscal year as part of the base. We request that if you do rename the file in any way, that you maintain the entire base, but at minimum maintain the fiscal year. When providing technical assistance, one of the ways that we verify that is the right form is checking the date and the name of the SmartForm. Then checking the date within the SmartForm itself, and then we check for the date within the XML. As I noted earlier, the date being incorrect will result in the XML upload failing. These dates matching or not matching do confirm whether there was an issue with the original SmartForm and will allow us to take the next appropriate step. This may seem small, but it is an issue that we've seen throughout the years that will reduce the number of XML failures, but it will also allow for us to quickly identify a potential cause for the failure or a larger issue. So to reiterate, the date plays a major role in the success of the XML uploading and saving successfully. We'll discuss XML uploads more in depth during the December 9th webinar. Now, Tiffany will provide an overview about how to access SmartForms. In partnership with NASCAS, we did create a one-pager describing these steps. That one-pager is available in the annual report toolkit, as well as the box.com folder with the SmartForms, and will also be included at the end of the PDF of these slides. We have also added the link to the chat. Tiffany?
Thank you, Monique. So the first step when working with the SmartForms is to download it and save it to your computer, OneDrive, SharePoint, or whatever system your agency uses. When saving your files, a best practice tip is to create an FY24 CSBG annual report folder in a non-temporary location that can be easily found in the future and save your SmartForm there. You may see a security risk under the Excel's ribbon area. It will look similar to what you see on the screen. This tells you that the macros are blocked. You need to close the file because it will not work properly. To unblock the macros, you will need to go to the folder where the SmartForm is saved. When you get there, you'll right-click on the file name to get a pop-up like you see on the screen. You will then click on Properties. You should now have a pop-up dialog box like you see on the screen. You may see an unblock option. Click on the box in front of unblock to check it and then click OK. The SmartForm is now ready for you to open it. If you may not have to unblock your macros if you are using an older version of Excel. If you do not see the security risk message or you do not see the unblock option when you're in the properties dialog box, then your macros should already be unblocked. Another clue that your SmartForm is unblocked is that you will either see the enable content or enable editing message, which we will talk about in the next slide, or you may not see any messages at all. Once you have opened the SmartForm, you may now need to do one more step before it will function properly. If you see either the protected view or security warning message, then you need to click on either enable editing or enable content. If you do not, then the macros will not work. I'm going to now turn it back over to Monique.
Thank you, Tiffany. So, why is it important to enable macros? Primarily, it's because they lock cells and they ensure that the coding that was written into the SmartForms, like the validations, function properly. We will discuss the validations shortly. However, the lock cells are also important. Looking at the images on the screen, on the left is an example of a SmartForm in which the macros were not enabled, and on the right, the macros are enabled. And looking at the image on the left, this is highlighted field does not have a border, while on the right it does. This is a bit nuanced, but as the cells were not locked, the data did not transfer correctly into OLDC. We were only able to figure this out by really examining the SmartForm during the FQAR. Again, we want to empower and equip you as much as possible to use the SmartForms correctly, and this is one example as to why enabling macros is important. A quick knowledge check. Please add your answer in the chat. Why are macros important? Option A, they are key to being healthy. Option B, they ensure that the SmartForms function properly. C, they are not important and serve no purpose. Or D, they lock cells within the SmartForms. Just as a hint, there may be more than one answer. I see a few answers still coming in, so I'll give you a few more seconds. And for those who answered B and or D, you are correct. The macros do ensure that SmartForms function properly, and they also lock cells within the SmartForms. Completing modules 2 and 4. Now we'll provide some tips for entering data in modules 2 and 4 and what to look for through the validations. But before we dive in, let's discuss the difference between a warning and an error. This may look familiar to those states and territories that participated in a data assurance call during the fiscal year 23 review. Warnings are often based on the previous year's data, which creates a baseline. It does not mean we are indicating that the data is incorrect. It simply means it's showing a potential outlier in the trend of what's been previously reported. An example would be last year, your agency reported spending $100,000 on civic engagement, but in the next year, that number tripled to $300,000, which is about a 300% increase. The SmartForm flags that just to make sure it wasn't erroneous. Errors, on the other hand, are usually genuine miscalculations that show that there's a discrepancy in sums. This typically means data reported is incorrect. Sometimes these can be attributed to what we consider an interoperability. For example, when you upload the data, two data points switch somehow, or basic user error. Example, someone means to enter 275, but instead enters 257. These are things that need to be corrected unless there's a genuine justification for the error, which is something that you should define in your comments. Now let's look at a side-by-side for a warning and an error for Module 2. Let's say an agency reported spending $0 on capacity building in Module 2, but then reported capacity building activities. The SmartForm flags that because these are seen as companions. Now, it's likely that the money went elsewhere, but an unintended benefit was the agency staff received free training from something else. For example, the money was spent on healthcare, and in that procurement, the agency received Health Navigator training, which is deemed a capacity building activity. The warning here is not necessarily saying to correct it, but rather to verify that the agency did not in fact expend funding for capacity building and note it as such. This is a good example of when it would be good to submit a comment in the comment form that we will discuss later. On the other hand, in Module 2, Section C, an agency indicated they received other federal resources. Each time that's selected, the agency needs to identify that source. That's done through providing the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, or CFDA, number, the dollar amount, and a brief description. This is an error, and you should update it before submitting. Now let's look at an example of a warning and error for Module 4. An example of a warning is individuals who receive services may try to obtain and achieve an unanticipated outcome, such as unemployed adults obtaining and maintaining employment for at least 180 days. As this was not an anticipated outcome, the agency did not set a target and therefore enter 0. The SmartForm will flag this as a warning to verify that you did not set a target. And we are not asking that you retroactively set targets. Not setting targets is not something that you need to provide a comment for unless it's egregious, like setting no targets for an entire domain. Conversely, as an error in Module 4, the agency provides the number of individuals that were served for any particular FMPI. However, the agency leaves the target and actual results blank. The SmartForm will flag this as an error because if you enter data for one column, you must enter data for all 3 columns. If there was no target set and or no individuals that achieved those outcomes, then you should enter 0 in those 2 columns. No individuals achieving an outcome is another example of when a comment should be submitted in the comment form just to verify that it is accurate. But again, no need to provide a comment if no target was set. I also want to note that while there are validations or warnings and errors that are coded into each SmartForm, there are some that are not coded and that we do a manual review of during the Federal Quality Assurance Review. Tiffany will walk through validations that are both coded or programmed into SmartForm, but she'll also discuss some validations that are not programmed that require a manual review prior to submission. And again, these are intended to smooth in the FQAR process at the end, after submission.
Earlier, Monique talked about the errors and warnings. We just got done talking about those. We're now going to look at some examples of these that you may receive when you're entering data. On this slide, there is an example of a visual cue alerting you to a warning, or 3 warnings actually. The yellow shaded cells on the screen are the result of year-to-year validation checks that Monique alluded to. The SmartForm is comparing what data was entered under the current fiscal year side, which is on the left, to the data that was reported during the previous fiscal year, which is on the right. When you're reporting data this year, but not the previous year, as is the case with the education and agency capacity building domains you see on the screen, when you are reporting data last year, but not this year, as is in the case of the CSBG admin funds example you see on the screen, or if there is a significant difference between this year's and last year's numbers. This will result in a year-to-year difference validation warning message that will be received. Sometimes the SmartForm will not allow incorrect data entry, and the CFDA number is one such example. The correct format for this data point is number, point, number, as you can see on the screen. If you try to enter the number incorrectly, the SmartForm will give you a pop-up error message, and you will need to fix it before moving on. You may also receive other formatting errors, mostly about the number format, the minimum and maximum numbers, and character limits in text box. The SmartForm will also display similar pop-up messages alerting you to this. Similar to Module 2 SmartForm, the one for Module 4 also provides visual warnings and error clues. It also has the programming to help you enter data into the correct format and in using the accepted ranges. Additionally, you will see that Module 4 has navigation buttons over to the right-hand side that will take you to other tabs in the SmartForm. As Monique previously talked about, error messages use the red shading visual cue as you see on your screen. In this example, the error is being received because data was not entered into column 3, but there was data entered into column 1. If you scroll to the end of Module 4, Section C, which is the All Characteristics report, you will see E and F. A best practice tip is to use these 2 data points to report on programs that you cannot unduplicate. This may lessen the number of age-related and reporting more than the unduplicated number served validations on the quality assurance memos that are received, which are asking you to explain why a service or an outcome count is larger than the number on the all characteristics report. There are many similarities between Modules 2 and Module 4 SmartForms, but there is one major difference. As Monique mentioned earlier, the Module 4 year-to-year comparisons are found on the last 3 tabs of the file. These are mainly there for your reference. Unless there is a significant variance, Module 4's year-to-year differences will not be called out on the review memo. However, it is a best practice tip to internally review these using a does it make sense lens. Is the difference expected? If not, then it may be something you want to look into before submitting your report. An important thing to remember when it comes to the year-to-year checks, that small numbers, any slight changes to them may result in a year-to-year difference validation warning, even though it may not be considered significant. So just a tip about small numbers. Earlier, Monique talked about the outstanding errors and warnings tab. She also shared information again about the differences between errors and warnings. So on this screen, we're going to dive a bit more into these. The outstanding errors and warning tab summarizes the errors and warnings that are received when you're entering data. The severity tab tells you if it's an error or a warning. Your cells on your form will not be color-coded as they are on the screen. We are only doing this for illustration purposes. As Monique previously mentioned, errors should be fixed if possible prior to submission. And if you're not able to do so, then this is an example when you may want to provide a comment. Warnings, on the other hand, may or may not be on the quality assurance review memo. So a best practice tip is to use your best judgment and or follow the instructions provided by your state office as to which warnings you may want to provide a comment for. Another important column is the message description. This helps provide a clue about where to start when reviewing the information you entered and what correction may be needed. When working also on this tab, you can double click on any warning or error message and it will take you directly to that data point. Besides red and yellow shaded cells, sometimes there's a pop-up message when you hover over the cell. The red triangle in the upper right corner alerts you that the cell has a message. Here is a Module 2 example of this. Sometimes it's important to note that the message could be more than one issue, as the screenshot shows. If this is the case, each error or warning will be listed on a separate row on the Outstanding Errors and Warnings tab. So if you address one of the issues, you still may receive an alert because the other error or warning issue is still there. Here is a Module 4 example of a pop-up message. The screen also shows that there are non-data entry cells that also provide messages. These are those cells that you do not actually have to hover over to see the message. It just automatically populates. You will see these mostly under Section A or Section C, which is the NPIs and the all characteristics report. In this example, there is an NPI entry status cell that says that the row is incomplete. As the pop-up message tells you, it is incomplete because nothing was entered into column 3. I'm sorry. Here's an example of an age-related validation, error or warning validation. It is important to note that sometimes these are programmed into the SmartForms and other times they are not. In this particular example, you see both cases. In these examples, you will see that the age is a factor in both of these indicators. And the SmartForm, if programmed, will compare the numbers reported under the NPIs and or the services to what you report under the all characteristics report. But other times, these are not programmed into the SmartForms. We are working on updating those for future years, so all validations are in the SmartForms. But for this current year, some of them may not be. So a best practice would be if there's an age demographic to the NPI or to a service, to go over and look at the number reported under the age demographic on the all characteristics report. You can identify a potential error or warning on your own. Here are some examples of error message that may be received on the all characteristics report. Instead of using a data entry cell pop-up message approach, as you've seen on the other sections, this section uses a Section C status area under most of the individual and household level characteristics. Sometimes it may seem as if the message is the same, but there may be a word or two different. For example, the top screenshot says cannot be greater than, where the bottom one says should not be less than. Sometimes I'm sorry, give me just 1 second. Okay, here's another example of an error or warning message that on the demographics section that uses not item A in its comparison, but uses an age range comparison. So this example on the screen shows this. The number reported under the education level 14 through 17 does not equal the number of individuals reported under 14 through 17 age range on question 2. And because of this, the system is flagging it as an error because the number reported under the age level, the education level, age 14 through 17, should equal the number of individuals reported under the age demographic under that same 14 to 17 age range. Sometimes error and warning messages received on the all characteristics report use of the above language, or some of the characteristics use of the above language. When this is the case, the error and warning validation is comparing what was entered under what we call the child data points. As you see on the example, there are several examples where the child data points are larger than the parent. This is true under the health insurance types, the the cash benefits, and the other income sources. So these use the of the above language, and they're calling out errors, as you see on the screen, because a child data point is larger than what was reported under the parent. Unfortunately, services or section B is where validations on the quality assurance review memos may not have, or excuse me, where the validations that are on the quality assurance review memos may not have been programmed into the SmartForms, either because we're working on it or it's a module 2 and module 4 comparison, such as when you're reporting weatherization or CSBG funds, but to services. Here is a best practice tip that we just shared on a previous slide. Perform your own comparisons is a possibility. In this example, you could look at the service with a specific age range and compare that to the all characteristics report. And if you notice where they are not working together because the service is larger than what's being reported on the age demographic, then this will be flagged possibly as a warning on your review memo. Another common validation is that there is that NPIs are being reported, the national performance indicators or outcomes are being reported, which is section A, are being reported under the domain, but no services are being reported. In this example, you could compare the service domain to the same NPI domain. And if you see outcomes but no services, then you may want to ask why, because this may be flagged on the review memo. Another service comparison validation is between Module 2 and Module 4. When you're looking at this validation, you're looking, are you reporting either CSBG or other resources under Module 2 that may have a service domain connection? On the left-hand side, the agency is reporting CSBG funds under employment, but is not reporting employment services. On the right side, the agency is reporting weatherization funds, but not reporting weatherization services. This may be flagged on the review memo. I will now turn it back over to Monique.
Thank you, Tiffany. As a summary, there are many validations or warnings or errors that are written into the SmartForms. However, again, there are some instances where a manual check or verification is needed, which Tiffany reviewed. We also recommend looking at the fiscal year 23 review memo as a guide for states and territories to review the data prior to submitting to OCS. Those review memos can be found in your box.com folders, or you can contact your data and evaluation specialist. Now we'll discuss the process for exporting the SmartForm to an XML. Before we go over the process, I just want to share the definition for an XML, or an extensible markup language. An XML essentially stores the data from the state database or SmartForm in a file that OLDC can read. The XML has defined fields with specific names and a specific order. So it is important that you use the XML that we defined. Now Tiffany will review the process.
Okay, so under the Outstanding Errors and Warnings tab, you will see the XML export button at the very top. You will click on this, and a dialog pop-up should appear asking where you want to save the XML file. Select the folder where it should be saved and click OK. A best practice tip is to save the XML file in the folder where the SmartForm is. Earlier in the webinar, when I was talking about enabling macros, there is a way to check to see if your macros are working properly. This is how you will do it. When you first start using your SmartForms, before you start entering data, come over to this tab, click on this button, and if the pop-up dialog comes open, then your macros are working. But if you do not see this pop-up, then you know that your macros are not working. So just a best practice tip there. I'm going to now turn it back over to Monique.
Thank you. And we will have a live demo of that process during the December 9th webinar. Throughout this webinar, we have noted some examples of when a comment should be provided. As noted during the Module 2 and Module 4 webinars, we recommend submitting the comment template if there are any comments clarifying your data. Overall, you should use your best judgment when it comes to submitting comments to supplement your data. However, the rule of thumb is to comment on items that you anticipate to appear on the review memo or that you think is important for us to know. To guide that, we do have a template, and we have some guidance on when to provide comments that is useful to us during the FQAR. However, submitting comments is optional. If you do decide to submit comments, we have provided a comment template within the box.com folder. We request that you use this comment template to provide any comments that you deem necessary to submit. So, CSBG eligible entities should consider the following when deciding whether to submit a comment. Again, review all errors and warnings within the Outstanding Errors and Warnings tab. If there are any errors or warnings that are present, because the data is correct, we recommend providing a comment that justifies that the data is correct. This will minimize the number of comments during the FQAR because if you are telling us ahead of time, we are less likely to ask about it during the review. That being said, we do request more than just the data is correct, especially in instances where the data may be illogical. For example, more individuals obtaining an outcome or receiving a service than what is reported in the all characteristics report. Additionally, providing a fuller explanation helps us to better understand your data when it comes to telling the CSBG story, national reporting, and future technical assistance. Grant recipients should review the comment template prior to submitting to OCS. This includes verifying that there's a comment for any outstanding errors or warnings within the SmartForm, more specifically errors. Also, avoiding acronyms that are specific to your state or territory. And if it is a specific state or territory process, that the comment is written in a way that is understandable to OCS. OCS is making efforts to understand the differences and the similarities across the network, but it is helpful to ensure that the comment is not so nuanced that we end up still having to follow up with more questions. Again, more detail is better. There are instances where a comment is provided, but the comment does not seem to really address the error or warning. We do read every comment that is submitted, and sometimes we still need to seek additional clarity. So please review the comments to ensure that they will make sense to someone who is not involved in the day-to-day. Lastly, please combine all comments from CSBG eligible entities into one form and work with your CSBG eligible entities on how to submit comments to you with their data. Comments should be attached to either the Module 2 or Module 4 state level form. One form can be submitted for both modules. And again, we will demo this during the December 9th webinar. Another quick knowledge check. Please add your answer in the chat. What does OCS do during the FQAR, or Federal Quality Assurance Review? A, review for validations that were included in the SmartForm. B, review for validations that are not included in the SmartForm. C, review all provided comments. D, review for data validity and quality. Or E, all of the above. And I will give you a few moments to answer. I already see some answers coming in. Okay, and I see them slowing down. I'll give you a few more seconds. But if you answered E, you are correct. All of the above. OCS does believe in the validity and quality of your data and are here to review that during the federal quality assurance process. But again, today's webinar was to help smoothen that process and so that we can get to a final report more quickly. On November 19th, my colleagues gave a very in-depth overview of Module 3. If you were unable to attend that webinar, I do recommend reviewing the slides. We have just added the link for that presentation in the chat, and the recording should be available soon. Tiffany will briefly review how to complete the Module 3 form.
Okay, Module 3 has SmartForms, but they're a little different than what you will see for Module 2 and Module 4. And we want to go over some of those noticeable differences. When you're entering data under the Module 3 SmartForms, you will be entering most of it under what's called the status form. And there are three main types of fields that you will be using. One is the check or selection box, one is a dropdown, and one is a text field. One thing that is different is that Module 3 uses pop-up windows to select the CNPIs, which stands for the Community National Performance Indicators. And these are what you're using to measure the outcomes, as well as there's a strategies pop-up that you will identify what you're doing to actually achieve the outcomes. Now, I want to talk really quick about earlier when we talked about how to double check your Module 2 and Module 4 SmartForms to make sure that the macros are enabled by clicking on the Export to XML button. Module 3 does not have an XML file. So when you're checking these module SmartForms, it is suggested that you click on either the CNPIs or the Strategies button on the status form. If you do not have the appropriate selection box pop up on your screen, then you know you haven't enabled the macros. So you will only see the CNPI and the strategy pop-ups if your macros are enabled. This may look familiar to you because the CNPIs are tracked similarly to the FNPIs, but there are some notable differences. First, you will be entering outcome data under the individual domain tab, such as the housing tab that you see on the screen. What domain tabs you see are based on the selection you made on the status form. Another thing you may notice is that some of the CNPIs are grayed out. This is because they were not selected as outcomes for the initiative, and only the non-grayed out ones will allow you to enter data. Another difference is that there are two types of outcomes, counts of change and rates of change. And rates of change have two additional columns that no other indicators have. This would be baseline and the auto-calculated expected percentage change. So it's important to note that you will be providing some different data on the CNPIs than you are reporting on the FNPIs. I'm going to now turn it back over to Monique.
Thank you, Tiffany. As previously noted, Module 3 should be attached as a SmartForm to the Module 3 form within OLDC. Please do not convert to a PDF, and only submit completed SmartForms that are in the active implementation phase and maturity phase. More information about these phases can be found in CSBG DCL 2020-14 Community Level Transformations Module 3 Guidance. The link has been added to the chat. As in Module 3 is optional, there is no need to submit a blank form or a note saying that we do not have a community level transformation this year. Now, a quick review of resources and reminders. These have been shared before, so we just want to go over them briefly. In Action Transmittal 2024-01, we detailed 3 categories of resources: tools, training and technical assistance. The tools are the tangibles and the things that you need to get your annual report submitted. Trainings are the dynamic conversations we review with clear objectives. Technical assistance is the homework, how you may be applying the knowledge of PEAK and how we can help you better use that information. Our goal is to get you to see you all win and succeed. So let's review each one of these in more detail. Please note the important links referenced here, which are also being added in the chat. From the OCS Community Services Block Grant homepage, you can access our CSBG Annual Report Toolkit, CSBG Events Calendar, and the CSBG Webinars by scrolling to the bottom of the CSBG homepage and clicking the drop-down for grant recipient resources. You will then be able to access the applicable links and resources as noted in the bottom image. If you need any additional support, please reach out as soon and as often as needed. The CSBG Annual Report Toolkit is available now and updated regularly. This has the fillable tools for Module 1, as well as other materials that we've mentioned throughout this webinar series. The online data collection system is where all grant recipients, states, tribes, and territories must submit their complete annual report. Also, through the cooperative agreement, NASCAS has additional training and technical assistance tools for each module and the vendor portal. While the vendor portal is primarily for states and territories with databases and systems, this vendor portal also has a complete listing of all validations. The vendor portal is password protected, but there is no username. All trainings can be found on the CSBG events calendar, and as the PowerPoints become available, you can find them under the links column. We also have the on-demand webinars, which are the webinars from prior years. These webinars are still useful and available to you. This webinar series first focused on understanding the CSBG Annual Report for Performance, and all 5 of those webinars have been completed, and the PDFs for most, if not all, are available on the events page. As well as some of the recordings are available, such as the recording for the kickoff, submitting the state administration module, and explaining eligible entity expenditures, capacities, and resources. The second part of this webinar series focused on leveraging systems and tools for annual report submissions. Earlier this week, we focused on using state systems for reporting, and today we focused on understanding and troubleshooting SmartForms. And on Monday, we have our final webinar accessing the online data collection system. So I invite you to please join us for our next and final webinar of the fiscal year 24 CSBG Annual Report webinar series, accessing the online data collection system. This webinar will take place on Monday, December 9th from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and will provide an overview of how to access and submit the annual report through OLDC. The link to register can be found on the CSBG events calendar page. Lastly, for targeted and general technical assistance, please reach out to your assigned program specialist and policy and data evaluation specialists. We work closely as a team and request that you include both contacts in any outreach. You can find your regional contacts on the pages shared in the chat. Please also take note of the fiscal year 24 annual report office hours that will occur on March 4th and March 6th of 2025. More information will be provided as that time approaches. And I also want to provide you with Tiffany's contact information. This will also be shared to the chat. Thank you so much for joining.